Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes.
Welcome, everyone. This is Therapy Dudes. It's Andre Karkamaz and Dan Fox. We are sponsored by Boulder Psychological Services. Go to boulderpsychologicalservices.com for all your therapy needs. I have a kind of like a retainer in right now. So if you hear that in my voice, that's what's going on. I had an underbite. I'm working through it with my orthodontist. That's what it is, right? An orthodontist?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, only 16 weeks of wearing this, but it sounds noticeable to me. We are talking about failure to launch mainly, how to work through that as parents, kind of the sticking points, the friction points that parents run up against constantly. Dan's going to share his experience because he has plenty to share.
Thank you. Yes.
We'll just jump right into it.
That was a one star. One star.
Oh, I wasn't even trying to take a dig at you that time. I just know you've been struggling with some of this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again. I
You
thought
did good though. You got through it.
I,
And your
I
kids are
thought I was
good.
doing well in life. I feel
You
like I'm
are.
on a winning streak. But
You're doing great.
I mean there are some times that stick out to me in my, younger adult life that really speak to like that sense of just getting like a total sort of like, wind knocked out of your sails, like back to square
Oh,
one, like
sure.
everything's ruined kind of energy. Um, and but before, well, I'll get into mine first. Sure. I'll get into mine first before I get into, my kids. Um, but the the experience that really stands out for me is that college had been a good 4 years. Like I really feel like I nailed it on a lot of levels in college. It was easy for me in terms of the academics that were required to get a computer science major degree at a liberal arts school that didn't have a very sophisticated computer science department. It was easy to get through those classes. Um, I must admit that I also found a teacher, a professor who was a wonderful musician on the South Indian drum and taught classes on that. And I really liked it. And I had done some drumming in school before that point, and I became his TA. And he didn't completely understand the grading system. So I would take a class with him each semester and also TA a class, which sometimes accounted for half of my four classes that I was taking in a given semester. And he would give me A pluses in both of those classes. So the my grade, I mean, I was like just, you know, in getting like this grade inflation that was like completely ridiculous and, made it so I was able to get academic awards and things like that from my schooling, even though it was so, I mean, half my classes were just like, banging on this drum. It was like not that rigorous. And
Okay.
and simultaneously, I was working at a summer camp in various different leadership roles that was getting a lot of recognition because it was a camp for kids with HIV and AIDS, and we would have celebrities come to the camp. The camp would be like featured on television shows. The director of the camp was on like Oprah at one point. It was this like very like well-known thing. And the message that I would constantly get in what I was doing was like, you're amazing. We're so glad to have you. And when I graduated college, I was lucky to get this job teaching math out in Hawaii at Punahou Academy, which is a very like hoity-toity college prep high school where I was at. It's a K through 12, but I was working in the high school. And from day one, the message was very different. It wasn't like, you're amazing. We're lucky to have you. It was, we're amazing. You're lucky to be here. And it was really, really different. And although like at summer camp, the relational connections and what I really valued from, working with young people was paramount, right? And that was front and center in a camp environment. At this college prep school, what was front and center was the grades you were getting. And I was teaching math. And I like math personally, but I don't care if somebody who's 15 or 16 isn't really into math and doesn't want to be into math and isn't getting like A's on every like that's not important. Like it never was a
Right.
motivator. And I kind of understood why they wouldn't necessarily like math because even though I personally enjoyed it, I can say that beyond Algebra 1,
It gets kind of complicated.
it gets complicated and less useful.
I agree with
There has
that.
never been a time in my day-to-day life outside of teaching math to other people, right? There's never been a time in my day-to-day life that I've ever had to use any mathematical concept beyond something that was like at the Algebra 1 level. So years
Right.
of when students are like, this is useless. I'm never going to use it in my real life. I kind of feel like, yes, you are correct. And, I can make the argument of like, well, just like if you're training for like a sport and you're like, doing high steps through tires, that's not going to happen on the football field, but the skills you learn from doing that are going to translate to being able to be like skillful out in this other, sport
Yeah,
activity.
but even then it relates to their activity, right? Like that's one of the things that like you got to give it to kids. Like the school system is does not make a lot of sense.
Right, the forced march of jumping through hoops and learning stuff that isn't going to apply to their like experience and has a very loose connection to this idea that, but it's teaching you this way of thinking that is going to really be useful later, even if you're not specifically thinking about math, tends to fall apart because a lot of kids don't understand what's happening conceptually. So they're just desperately trying to memorize steps so that they don't fail the test when they get a
Right.
certain question.
The test
And
of memory.
yeah, it's
I mean, I would argue exposing kids to various topics is good to see where their interests lie, but there's got to be an assessment after that to see what kind of schooling would work for them
yeah.
and what kind of topics they should jump into.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, why hasn't that happened? I don't know, but keep going.
Well, basically what happened for me was that over a 2-year period in Hawaii, I was getting increasingly discouraged by, what I was doing to sort of like contribute to the world around me, feeling like my job wasn't that meaningful or useful, and getting increasingly aware that what I really was passionate about was like the psychology of what's going on for people and how to like help them on that level, right? With like mental fitness and mental health. And that I had missed the boat in college because instead of focusing on what I now knew I wanted to like do as a career, which was psychology, I had instead just kind of like taken this easy route through computer science, which I would come to never use again. And by the third year, I was like quite depressed about just what was going on and feeling isolated from my old life back on the mainland. And I had done some initial efforts to try to like redirect my career. Like I tried to get into the counseling department at the school that I worked at
Mhm.
and was told in no uncertain terms that I needed a master's degree in counseling if I was going to have a future in it. And then I did a little like legwork on that and realized that I couldn't even go to graduate school because I didn't have the undergraduate classes necessary to get into graduate school. So I would
Well,
need another like year and a half of schoolwork to get the prerequisites just to be able to apply to grad school. And that just put me into an existential crisis of feeling like I wasted my life and I could have been something. I could have been a contender or something, but there was like nothing like now I would have to go back and take undergraduate classes at like a community college to be able to get what I need. Like it was going to take me years to like write the course, right? Get things back on track. And this was such a different, right? I felt like alone and lost and discouraged. And, my internal messaging was like, wow, I really screwed this up. And it was so different from the sense that I had had in college of like, you have kicked ass. Now you're going to be able to go out in the world and like, just, make a huge difference, like have a big impact. Everybody's going to be like psyched to have you on their team, blah, 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 all that. And it was nothing like that. And I eventually quit teaching mid-year, right at winter break, because I was so depressed and discouraged that I felt like I had nothing to give. And that farther demoralized me. And I spent a good year and a half just kind of wallowing in self-pity, moving from place to place, ending up eventually living back at my mom's house, which I thought I would never do.
When
And
was it?
I was like 23 at this point, 24.
Okay.
Um, and I slowly crawled out of that, started taking some classes at a community college to get the the classes that I needed to be able to apply to grad schools, and was able to apply to the grad schools and eventually got into Naropa in Boulder, and things started to click a little bit better at that point. Um, but it was for me like a multi-year failure to get back to our like topic of like, the value of failure. Like I felt like I had failed at life for like the better part of 2 years as I tried to get things back on track. And a good year or two before that, as I was realizing that like this foundation I made wasn't that awesome and wasn't the direction I wanted to be going in anyway. And I was completely miserable and, depressed, worried about the future, like unable to not be crying at various different times. And it
Yeah.
it was like I never want to go back there, but at the same time, some of the things that I kind of came to understand and the direction that came out of that period was like that did create the foundation of where I am now. And even when I was miserable at future points in my life, comparing it to like that misery, I was like, well, like stay the course, buddy. Like this is so much better than that
What
whole
I've had
period
in the
of time.
past. Yeah.
And as I don't know, met more people through my work over time, I feel like this is not that uncommon for people in their early 20s to go through this kind of soul-crushing loneliness and existential life.
It is terrible. And I see it in most of my clients that are in their 20s. And um, I think it's really hard to find your way in general in society, but like to perceive every misdirection you take or every thing that doesn't work out as a failure is I think incorrect. I think you do find your way, kind of like you did in your story. Like you found out what you needed to do. You decided to go do it. You found a way to do it. You went through a lot of grief and maybe some self-disdain, right?
Yeah.
But you got through it and you found your way. And a lot of my clients that are young and in their 20s feel stuck, feel lost in this very same way. And I just wish so bad that they can understand that, society, the expectations of what success looks like and who you're going to be and what a burden is and what a burden isn't to those that love you. These are all things that you're making up. These are expectations you are making up about where you should be based off of nothing. Just a feeling of like emptiness and directionlessness, right? You
Right.
make up that you're not good enough or that you're lost or just keep going.
I agree. I agree with all of that. And I think that some of the things that I was naive about was how not like cold and cruel the real world is, but how it's not going to like throw me a parade upon my arrival, right? I'm not going to like go somewhere out in the world after college or after high school or when you get a chance to live on your own and have just this sense of like, oh, finally, like I did what they said in school and I achieved, and now like, the road is paved in gold. I can just kind of march down it to like my ultimate triumph. Like that was so not anything like what was happening. And
And it's not the case for most people.
right, right. And how could it be? It's like when we get out into the job world after high school or college, we're like the lowest level of experience compared to anybody else that's applying for jobs. We have to do something that we just feel like is not our calling, right? It's usually like some very like low level position just trying to like get through. And it takes a long time to really sync up and feel like we've got a meaningful career and that we're valued by the larger world. And, everybody else out in the bigger world is just kind of doing their own thing. And, they might be sort of like polite and nice and, interested in you on a certain level, but it's not like as like, a 21-year-old fresh out of college, they're like just wowed by, what an amazing student you were while you were in like nobody cares. Nobody cares. And and that was the part that I didn't really like. I mean, one of many things I didn't see coming, right? But that part took a while to be able to be at peace with that like nobody thinks I'm amazing because I'm actually not amazing, which is okay. Don't cushion that one for me, right? Like don't be
Oh
like,
no,
no,
I agree.
yeah, five, five. That was your best one. That
I
was
wasn't going to cushion anything. That was spot on.
that was your best one. Oh my God. That was great. That was great. For those of you not aware, we like to banter and tease each other, and we're giving each other a score of 1 to 5 stars based on how well it lands. But yes, well done. That one should be in the Hall of Fame.
I do, Carol. I think you're right. See, I did cushion you a little bit.
Thank you. And I'm really okay with like, who I am and like the impact that I'm having on my, friends and family and the people around me and the work that I do and all
Uh,
that. But I also, if you had like, talked to like 21-year-old self, I would have assumed, hey, if I'm going to be a therapist, I'm actually going to be the next Oprah and I will have books and people will worship me, right? And that kind of like grandiose naivety was it it was like a hard fall, like having that like get punctured and trying to figure out how to find meaning from doing something that's like more realistic and isn't on that like giant like sort of pedestal where everybody's just like giving you accolades.
well, I think we're trying to achieve the best because we want to prove that we're worthy of love ultimately, or worthy of a place in society or something like that, right? Because we're looking for acceptance, all of us.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes we have to go to extremes because we feel so bad about ourselves, or we really want to dispel like a narrative about us not being good enough, right? And the most obvious proof would be if I'm the best of the best at something, right? Then of course I'm good enough because I've made it to the top. There's nothing past that. But, lo and behold, I've made it to the top a million times and I still feel crappy. So I'm just kidding. I've never made it to the top, but it's never happened. But I've had that feeling that like I need to be the best at something or I need to achieve a certain way or I'm just not going to be good enough or taken seriously or, something like that.
Yeah.
And we want to feel like we fit in.
Yeah.
And but you could be just like Dan Fox, like very average, maybe below average, and still very loved by everyone. And me even worse, by the way. So, he's doing better than me.
Oh, you have your youth, right? Like me
Oh
as
my
a
God.
20-year-old was, way worse off than you are. So you're ahead of the game.
I know, it's pretty weird these days.
Um, the that idea of like you get to the top, which is something that I feel like we all kind of go after. I think it's interesting to look at, and two people's stories stand out to me. One is Michael Phelps and one is Aaron Rodgers, where they both got to the pinnacle of achievement in
And then
their
they got depressed.
sports career. Right. They got existentially depressed. It was like, oh my gosh, like I'm, 28 or whatever, and is like my best achievements behind me and the rest of my life is just kind of downhill from
Right.
here. And if you
Well,
look into their stories, like Michael Phelps was like, you know, really like very depressed, very depressed,
oh, I
like,
know.
and spoke openly about it. And at the beginning of the pandemic, wrote a like sort of personal narrative to, I think it was Sports Illustrated, it might have been ESPN, but just about like how he was struggling. And I think it just speaks to our kind of human condition, and that idea of like chasing this dream and that once we get there, everything will be fine.
It's not
It's an
true.
act, right? It's like if it's not fine now, it's actually not going to be fine whenever we get that like achievement, because the feeling of that is going to be so short-lived. And that was definitely Aaron Rodgers' experience too, that he had in the locker room after winning his first Super Bowl of like, oh wow, is this it?
Yeah.
Is this all like now like what do I do with the rest of my life? And
Well, we're assuming once we reach like a certain level of success or we reach that goal, and most of the time the goal is actually not really defined for people. So these are two examples of defined goals. Like this is what you can achieve. This is the perfect achievement in this field.
yeah,
And even then, we have these people still getting depressed after this because it's a big illusion. You're chasing something, right? That
yeah,
makes you think you're going to feel a certain way the rest of your life and that things will change. Just
yeah,
I often tell my clients in their 20s who are struggling with this stuff, like, okay, what is the standard? What are you chasing? Can you define it? What does it even look like? How do you see yourself being? What would change if you had this that you keep thinking you need,
right,
realistically,
right.
right?
And I think on another level, it's like, and how can we be at peace with where we are in the journey now? Right?
That's
Like,
the most important part.
right, if we can accept where we are now and the road ahead of us now and feel good about who we are now, that kind of predicts that wherever we get to in the future, we'll be able to sort of bring that same energy.
And
But
there are things that can stop you from feeling that way that you need to go to therapy for, like trauma, shame, like self-limiting beliefs, stuff like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And
But it's
there's all sorts of
universal.
like, yeah, it's universal. And I think people like this is sort of an age of a lot of anxiety and depression for people in our culture, and that often that doesn't even have an easy source, and we've just got to, figure out how to work with that. And
Well, it's
I like
because
to say
we're hyper
practice.
competitive.
Say again?
The culture that we live in currently is hyper competitive. Everything's out there in the open for everyone to see. It's the most probably directionless version of our culture. There's too much to do, too much going on, no real, like oftentimes when people graduate undergrad or they graduate high school and they don't go to school after that, they feel that like, okay, what's next? I don't know what to do. Yet I'm behind because look at everyone else and how well they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the average person isn't doing as well as they think.
Yeah. Um, to circle back briefly to my narrative in my early adulthood,
Hmm.
that I mean, was like when I look at my whole journey, like that was sort of the biggest failure, this like multi-year process. And also, I feel like pivotal in terms of helping me to kind of get to a place of more realistic understanding about myself and the world and get on a path that has, ultimately gotten me to where I am today. And that although I never want to revisit that, energy and state of mind that I was in back then,
Right.
I really valued, like, I needed something like that to happen to help me grow in ways that I needed to grow.
Right. So you needed to let yourself fail
I needed to let
and
myself,
you needed to keep trying.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
pick up the pieces and
Yeah.
start
And
over.
see that you can do it
Yeah,
the way you need to do it and how you need to do it.
right. And I needed to get my sense of self-worth calibrated in a different way, right? It couldn't be that like I'm only worthy of love or attention if I'm like the best of the best and I'm receiving like how can I, be okay with who I am
Right.
when there's like 8 billion people on the planet? Like why do I think I need to be like at the top? Like that's such a weird personal mandate.
Because we're creatures that want to evolve. And when we live in a certain mindset based off of a culture we grow up in or a group we grow up in, that's all we seem to reference. We have a hard time referencing like an eagle's eye view, like a bird's eye view, like you just said, of there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like, why am I trying to be the best? Right? I'm doing pretty good compared to a lot of people on the planet.
Right.
And
And
somehow I'm
why do
still
I
fun.
need to
Yeah.
feel like I'm the best to not feel like I'm a miserable, worthless piece of shit?
Yeah. And that's the sad part. Is like, this is the part that hurts the most in the work I do with clients is like watching these perfectly capable, wonderful, amazing human beings
Yeah.
just destroy themselves internally because of this battle that they're having. Nobody's telling them any of this. They're telling themselves this,
Yeah.
right? It's sad. I wish it was different.
Yeah. Well, you're making an impact. This is why you do the work that you do.
It is. I really care a lot about them, and um, I feel the same about you and your clients and how you talk about kids and your family. And I think at the end of this, I just want people to hear, the word failure. It might mean something to you that is awful. I see it as more of like a direction shift, a learning opportunity, pressure for growth, right? It doesn't need to be bad.
Yeah. Um, I think that's a good one to end on. Thanks for listening. Hopefully
Yeah.
this was helpful. We'll see you next time.
Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes. Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. Listen to them anytime you're coming unglued. Time for therapy dudes.
I will never stop getting joy from having stupid noises from the sound machine to play.